interest-based finance and global warming, making the connection. It's always good to see people from so many countries at these webinars. Today we have about 224 attendees, alhamdulillah, listening from the four corners of the world: Cameroon, Australia, Ukraine, France, the US. So we're glad to see that an issue of global importance attracts a global audience. The format for today is going to be, inshallah, brief, and it's going to also give you an opportunity to ask questions. So the presentation itself will endeavor to be 40 minutes, and we'll follow that by live Q&A, which can go quite long, as much as 40 minutes. And we'll divide into three sections called global warming, interest-based finance, and Islamic finance as a greener alternative. It's obviously a vast topic for something so crucial and so critical, but we feel it needs to be discussed. The basic theme is that interest compounds faster than nature's ability to cope with this growth. And the growth of the physical world, of food, of people, of other natural resources, human resources, the growth of these physical aspects of our world can never keep pace with the growth of money compounding on interest. If you only have 5 minutes, then you can log out now, because that's the whole theme of tonight's talk. Tonight for us, but morning and past midnight for others. So that's the basic theme. If you take nothing else away from this webinar, then that's what we're trying to say, that compounding interest cannot be a sustainable proposition. We're sometimes asked how as Ethica Institute, for those of you who are new to us, we train, certify, and advise bankers and students on Islamic finance. And we're sometimes asked, well, how can we live in a world without interest? And we often answer, how can we live in a world with interest? And we're seeing the results of what interest has done. It was probably harder to explain this in the 60s or 80s even, but we now see on an almost weekly basis some natural disaster or other that foretells further disasters at a quickening pace and at a much more severe pace. And we'll unfortunately have to discuss some of these things. So that is the basic premise of what we're saying, is that interest compounds faster, and the growth of the physical world cannot keep pace with the growth of money compounding on interest. This webinar is a starting point for this discussion. We clearly don't have all the answers. We're just a bunch of bankers, but we would like to start by asking the right questions and raising the issues. Last week, I had compiled a reading list to add to this webinar at the end, which we will, inshallah. And just to supplement our reading list, we went to Google and we said, okay, well, what else is out there? So we punched in, interest-based finance and global warming, and we were very happy to see that there was already a webinar that had already happened on the same topic. There was the first 10 results on Google were interest-based finance and global warming live webinar. So we excitedly looked at all the results, and it turned out it was this webinar. So there really is no research on this topic, and that gives us, inshallah, something to look forward to in terms of as Muslims and as humanitarians, whether we're Muslim or not, as humans, as a starting point for, inshallah, a new age of awareness. So Islam is concerned with the well-being of society, and sometimes that well-being is at the immediate expense of the individual, at the immediate expense of that individual's gratification. For instance, a single interest-based loan may seem harmless, but an entire economy based on interest can have devastating consequences For anyone who's not a blind rabbit, and they've seen the global financial crisis, just completely ravaged the entire global economy. And I guess the silver lining of that is that global carbon emissions went down 3% in the last 2 years, but that's probably little solace for most people. So this is the result of interest that we're seeing. Alcohol is a fitting example because like interest, it does have some short-term benefits. And a study recently appeared in the British medical journal, The Lancet, that found alcohol to be, quite surprisingly to many, the world's most dangerous drug. That was a surprise to many of us, and we understood why after we understood the study. The study was probably the first of its kind that looked at not just the effects of alcohol on the individual, but looked at the effects of alcohol on society as a whole. And that's what Islam looks at, the effects of a particular human input on society as a whole. And that's why things that seem ostensibly benign are potentially devastating. And we believe interest is just such a thing. It's similar with interest in the impact on the environment. Most problems are not root problems. Most problems are symptoms of root problems. And global warming is a symptom of a root problem. And the problem of interest, and obviously many other things. Interest is a major contributing factor. But the problem of interest and the unnatural demands it places on people and countries and ultimately the earth. And we acknowledge that interest is not the only cause, but there is obviously human greed at play, and our ability to consume beyond what Earth is able to provide. But what interest does is it enables a certain kind of greed and a certain kind of consumption that otherwise would not have been possible. So we think that it is a major enabler of this root problem. So now we come to global warming, and what's the connection? Well, at first glance, one doesn't really know what the connection is, but global warming is very much connected to interest, and we'll try to endeavor to show why. According to the IPCC, which is the a body formed by the UN when global warming first caught scientists' attention, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the American Meteorological Society, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and pretty much every major peer-reviewed scientific journal says two things. Global warming is real, and I hope nobody here doubts that. And number two, global warming is caused by human inputs to the environment. Knowing that, we can address the controversy if there's any controversy. There's no controversy in Europe, studies show, and other parts of the world, but there does seem to be some controversy in places like the US, where perhaps moneyed quarters have an interest in ensuring that major corporations don't have to spend the necessary money to combat environmental degradation. So that we address this controversy, or any controversy that people may have, whether global warming is happening and whether global warming is caused by humans, by looking not at forecasts, because anytime you have a conversation with a detractor, they'll say that, well, the forecasts aren't really all there, or these forecasts were wrong, or the methodology was flawed. We say, okay, well, let's not look at forecasts. Put them aside. Let's look at only historical, publicly available data. And when there is any doubt about historical data, rely on multiple data sources, which is precisely what we did. This chart shows 10 different peer-reviewed reconstructions of global temperature change in the last 1,000 years. The source for the compilation is the UK Meteorological Office. Nobody doubts these numbers. These numbers are very much real, and they contrast what's called the medieval warm period and the Little Ice Age with what we've seen since the beginning of the Industrial Age, essentially, 18th century to present. The second chart is from NASA and shows how global temperature rose from 1880 to the present decade. 1750 is regarded as a general rule of thumb for the pre-industrial age becoming the industrial age. 1880, global warming was very much activated. So since the beginning of the industrial age, and really since the beginning of modern-day interest-based banking, perhaps coincidence, perhaps not, but the last few decades are more telling when loans and aggressive lending to poor countries really came into full swing since the 70s onwards. We're just going to briefly touch on the technical side of global warming without getting too technical. Global warming is triggered by the excessive concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide, or CO2, is the byproduct of burning fossil fuels. And as more heat from the sun is trapped in our planet, the atmosphere's temperature rises, and so does the average temperature of the oceans. One proxy measure is that Arctic ice, which is measured at the end of the summer to get a constant in September, Arctic ice shrank from 10 million square miles to 4 million square miles in 1980 square kilometers, between 1980 and 2007. So the ability of the Earth to deflect sunlight is rapidly decreasing. By the way, for those of you who are just joining us, so far we've just touched on what we're going to discuss and contrast it with the problem at hand, and briefly into global warming. And my name is Atif Khan. I'm the Managing Director of Ethica Institute of Islamic Finance here in Dubai, and we are in Dubai right now, actually. So as more heat from the sun is trapped in our planet, the atmosphere's temperature rises, and so does the average temperature of the oceans. And ultimately there is a gradual melting of ice sheets, glaciers, and a rise in sea levels. We see a greater incidence of drought at subtropical latitudes. And really, people say, oh, okay, 1 degree in the next century or 10 degrees in the next century, I'll just turn up my AC. Well, it's not that easy. It's, the real problem isn't global warming. It's what happens as a result of global warming. It's global hunger, because we have less land on which to grow food. So the problem is actually hunger and lack of fresh water, really. So we see a greater incidence of drought at subtropical latitudes, and our inability to grow food and access clean water. So global hunger goes hand in hand with global warming. And there's an irony and a reality, and that is that when something is everyone's problem, no one does anything about it. And we're seeing precisely just that. And as Muslims, alhamdulillah, we don't care about things for themselves. We don't care about the environment or global warming or interest or anything for itself, but we care about it because it has been made a religious obligation for us to care about it. We care about it as a means to worship Allah. And the results are in Allah's hands, inshallah. And we'll be judged as Muslims and as humans on how we responded to the problems Allah gave us. So, the reality is that it is everyone's problem, and we should do something about it, even if what we feel we're doing seems